We only want important people at our wedding. Those 6 words sliced through the phone line like a blade through silk. I sat there in my kitchen, the receiver still warm against my ear, watching steam rise from my untouched cup of tea. The woman who would become my son's wife had just erased me from the most important day of his life. Important people. Not the mother who worked double shifts to pay for his college. Not the woman who held his fevered head when he was sick. Not the one who signed the loan papers when he needed his first car. Apparently, I wasn't important enough. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. She was waiting for me to beg, to cry, to throw some dramatic fit that would prove her point about keeping the wedding classy. Instead, I hung up. No goodbye. No argument. Just the soft click of the phone returning to its cradle. That's when something cold and calculating settled in my chest. Something my late husband would have recognized from our business days. The part of me that didn't get mad, I got even. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I walked to my home office, pulled out my old leather address book, and began making calls. Quiet calls. Professional calls. The kind that don't require raised voices or tears, just the weight of history and the power of paperwork. 22 calls, to be exact. Each number I dialed was connected to a venue. Each venue was connected to contracts. And each contract had one thing in common. My signature was on the original documents, back when my husband and I built our catering empire from nothing but determination and borrowed money. My daughter-in-law thought she was marrying into a family business. She had no idea she was stepping into a kingdom I helped build, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The first venue manager, Patricia, answered on the second ring. Clarice. How wonderful to hear from you. It's been ages. Hello, Patricia. I need to discuss the Martinez wedding booking. There's been a development. Her tone shifted immediately. She knew that voice. We all had our business voices, the ones that meant serious matters were at hand. Of course. What can I do for you? I'll need to exercise my contractual rights regarding that booking. The full documentation is on file from 1987. A pause. The sound of papers rustling. Then a long exhale. Oh my. Yes, I see it here. The co-ownership clause. Clarice, are you sure about this? Completely sure. By the time I finished my 20-second call, the sun had set outside my window. My tea had gone stone cold hours ago. But every single venue that woman had booked for her exclusive wedding had just become unavailable. She wanted a wedding without the unimportant people. She was about to get a wedding without a location. The phone rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Clarice. Her voice was shrill now, all that fake sweetness stripped away. What did you do? The venues are calling and canceling everything. Do you know what you've done? I took a slow sip of fresh tea I'd just made. Let the silence hang there like a noose. You told me you only wanted important people at your wedding, I said, my voice steady as granite. I respected your wishes. It seems you don't have anywhere for them to gather now. The scream that came through the phone could have shattered glass. Threats followed. Accusations. Promises of lawyers and lawsuits and family destruction. I hung up again. But here's what she didn't know yet. Here's what made me smile as I sat in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of all my sacrifices. Those 22 venues? They were just the beginning. Because when you spend 40 years building something with your bare hands, when your name is woven into the very foundation of an empire, when every brick and board carries your fingerprints, you don't just have leverage. You have nuclear options. And I was just getting started. Would you have stayed quiet like I did, or would you have exploded right there on the phone? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know what you would have done in my shoes.
The kitchen felt different after that second phone call. Smaller somehow. Like the walls had heard every cruel word and were closing in to protect me. I sat there staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. Waiting for my son to call and defend his mother. It never rang. That silence hurt worse than anything his fiancée had said. 43 years I'd been his mother. 43 years of scraped knees, broken hearts, celebration dinners, and midnight worry sessions. And when the woman he planned to marry decided I wasn't worth a wedding invitation, he couldn't even pick up the phone. The betrayal settled in my chest like swallowed glass. I walked through the house we'd lived in since he was 7. Every room held memories of sacrifice. The living room where I'd fallen asleep doing double bookkeeping shifts, trying to keep our catering business afloat after his father died. The dining table where I'd helped him with homework until midnight, then got up at 5 to prep wedding cakes. His graduation picture smiled at me from the mantel. Cap and gown, that proud grin, his arm around my shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he'd whispered in my ear that day. The student loans I'd co-signed were still in my file cabinet upstairs. Apparently, gratitude has an expiration date. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did on weeknights. But this wasn't a normal weeknight. This was the night I learned that love and loyalty only flow in one direction in my family. The wine tasted bitter. Everything tasted bitter. But sitting there in the quiet, something else began to simmer beneath the hurt. Something that reminded me of the woman who'd built a business from scratch. The woman who'd negotiated with banks and contractors and difficult clients. The woman who'd never backed down from a fight, even when the odds were stacked against her. That woman wouldn't cry into her wine. She'd dry her eyes and get to work. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one hopeful second, I thought it might be my son. Instead, it was a group text from the wedding party, one I'd apparently been included in by mistake. "Can't wait for the big day. Thanks for keeping it exclusive and classy. Only the best people." The message was from my son's best man. The replies came flooding in. Laughing emojis. Agreement. Excitement about the intimate guest list. Not one person asked where I was. Not one person seemed to notice that the groom's mother wasn't invited to his wedding. I was invisible. Erased. Like 43 years of motherhood meant nothing at all. But here's what they didn't understand about invisible women like me. We see everything. We remember everything. And we know exactly where all the bodies are buried, because we're usually the ones who buried them. Have you ever been quietly pushed aside by family? Share your story below. Someone needs to hear that they're not alone in this. The wine glass sat empty in my hands, but my mind was crystal clear now. I wasn't going to beg for an invitation. I wasn't going to plead my case or throw myself on their mercy. I was going to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. And tomorrow, I'd start with a trip to the attic. The attic stairs creaked under my feet the next morning, each step echoing through the house like a countdown. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight streaming through the small window, illuminating boxes I hadn't touched in years. The cedar chest sat in the corner where I'd left it after sorting through things when Harold died. Inside were the documents I'd almost forgotten about, the foundation of everything we'd built together. My hands shook slightly as I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and cedar oil brought back a flood of memories. Harold at our kitchen table, sketching venue layouts on napkins. Me typing contracts on our ancient typewriter, the keys sticking on humid summer nights. We'd been so young then. So stupid and brave and desperate to make something of ourselves. The first document I pulled out was the original partnership agreement for Davenport events. My name was right there beside Harold's, in my careful handwriting. Co-founder. Equal partner. Not silent partner, not investor founder. My son had inherited his father's share when Harold passed. But he'd never inherited mine. I kept digging through the papers, my excitement building with each discovery. Venue contracts from 1987, 1989, 1992. All bearing my signature as co-owner. Insurance policies listing me as primary beneficiary and controlling partner. Bank agreements with my personal guarantees still in effect. The paper trail was stunning. Overwhelming. 37 years of carefully documented ownership and authority, all sitting in a dusty chest while my family treated me like hired help. One document made me stop breathing altogether. The Riverside Manor contract. The crown jewel venue where my future daughter-in-law had booked her reception. I remembered negotiating that deal personally, fighting with the owner for weeks to get the terms we needed. Harold had wanted to walk away, but I'd persisted. Sometimes you have to play the long game, Harold, I told him. Sometimes patience pays better than pride. My signature was on every page. The ownership percentage was clear as crystal, 60% controlling interest to Davenport Events, with management authority retained by the founding partners. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every document. Page after page of proof that I wasn't just the groom's mother. I was the woman who owned the venues where his wedding was supposed to happen. The irony was delicious. My son's fiancée had chosen her wedding locations based on prestige and beauty, never bothering to research who actually controlled them. She'd picked the most exclusive venues in the county, thinking she was buying her way into high society. What she'd actually done was schedule her wedding in my house. The morning sun was higher now, casting sharper shadows across the attic floor. I gathered the documents into a neat pile, my business mind already calculating the next steps. First, I'd need legal confirmation of my current status. Then I'd need to understand exactly what authority these contracts still gave me. But deep down, I already knew the answer. These weren't just old papers. They were loaded guns. And my son's bride had just painted a target on her own back. I climbed down from the attic with my arms full of ammunition, ready to wage a war she didn't even know had started. The woman who'd called me unimportant was about to learn that some people build their importance with time, patience, and properly filed paperwork. Paper remembers what people forget. Selwyn Martinez answered his phone on the first ring, just like he had for the 30 years I'd known him. His voice was warm and familiar, a lifeline in the chaos my family had become. Clarice Davenport. What a pleasant surprise. Selwyn, I need your help. Legal help. The warmth in his voice shifted to sharp attention. What's happened? I told him everything. The phone call. The wedding exclusion. The documents I'd found in the attic. He listened without interrupting, making occasional humming sounds that told me his lawyer brain was processing every detail. Can you come to my office this afternoon? He asked when I finished. Bring everything you found. 3 hours later, I sat across from Selwyn's massive oak desk, watching him examine my documents through reading glasses that made him look older than his 68 years. His office smelled like leather and old books, the walls lined with law degrees and photos of his family. He'd handled our business legal work for decades, back when Harold and I were building our empire one contract at a time. If anyone could tell me where I stood, it was Selwyn. Clarice, he said finally, looking up from the papers. You always did have the receipts. What does it mean, Selwyn? Legally, I mean. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It means your daughter-in-law just stepped into a hornet's nest. My heart hammered against my ribs. These contracts are ironclad. Your ownership percentages are clear and uncontested. More importantly, Several of these venues are operating under management agreements that require your approval for major events. Even after all these years. Especially after all these years. These contracts were written to survive ownership changes, death, even business dissolution. Harold knew what he was doing when he insisted on those clauses. The room felt like it was spinning. So I can actually cancel their bookings? Absolutely. In fact, you have a legal obligation to review any events that might impact the business relationships you've maintained. His smile widened. It's not revenge, Clarice. It's fiduciary responsibility. I laughed despite everything. You always were good with the fancy words. Wait, there's more. He pulled out a different file. I took the liberty of running some quick research while you were driving over. Your son's business, the catering side he inherited, it's been struggling. Behind on several vendor payments. Some pretty significant debt. My stomach dropped. I didn't know. He wouldn't want you to know. But here's the interesting part. Several of these venue contracts include cross-default clauses. If the catering arm fails, the venue management rights revert to the surviving founding partner. Which is me. Which is you. The weight of what he was saying settled over me like a blanket. Not only did I have the power to cancel their wedding venues, but if my son's business failed, I'd own everything outright. Selwyn, what kind of leverage are we talking about here? He removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, the way he did when he was about to deliver earth-shattering news. The kind that most people would kill for, Clarice. Your daughter-in-law doesn't just want to exclude you from a wedding. She's trying to exclude you from a business empire you built with your bare hands. The afternoon sun slanted through his office windows, casting long shadows across the documents spread between us. Evidence of a lifetime of work, sacrifice, and careful planning. What do you recommend? His eyes twinkled with something that looked almost like mischief. I recommend we remind them who they're dealing with. Quietly. Professionally. Legally. And if they don't listen? Then we escalate. Step by step. Contract by contract. Until they understand that some women build their power so carefully, so completely, that trying to erase them is like trying to erase the foundation of a building. I gathered the papers into my purse, feeling more powerful than I had in years. How long do we have? Their wedding is in 6 weeks. More than enough time to apply appropriate pressure. Walking out of Selwyn's office, I felt like a different woman than the one who'd walked in. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh. But it was wrapped now in something stronger. Purpose. Strategy. The cold satisfaction of holding a royal flush while your opponents showed their cards. My son and his bride thought they were playing games with a harmless old woman. They were about to discover they'd picked a fight with a founding partner who'd been building leverage for 40 years. And I was just getting started.
3 weeks of investigation with Selwyn revealed a web of connections I'd almost forgotten existed. Every breadcrumb led back to the same truth. My fingerprints were all over the wedding industry in our county. Sitting in Selwyn's office with spreadsheets covering his desk, I felt like an archaeologist discovering her own buried city. Venue after venue, vendor after vendor, all connected to contracts I'd negotiated, relationships I'd built, deals I'd sealed with handshakes and careful paperwork. The metadata alone is fascinating, Selwyn said, pointing to his computer screen. These digital files show revision histories going back to the early 90s. Your electronic signature appears on 63% of the major venue management contracts in the region. I had no idea it was that extensive. You and Harold were thorough. Maybe too thorough for your own good, because now you're discovering just how much power you actually wield. He pulled up another file. Your daughter-in-law's wedding itinerary. Let's see what she's booked. The list made my blood run cold with its extravagance. Riverside Manor for the ceremony. The Grand Ballroom for reception. Sunset Gardens for photos. Highland Country Club for the rehearsal dinner. Even the smaller venues for the bridal shower and bachelor party. 22 locations total. Every single one connected to my business empire through contracts I'd helped write when they were just starting out. She really went all out, I murmured. She went all out with your assets, Selwyn corrected. Look at the booking fees alone. Nearly $250,000 spread across these venues. Money that flows through business relationships you established. The irony was breathtaking. The woman who'd called me unimportant had built her entire dream wedding on the foundation I'd laid. She was planning to celebrate her victory over me in venues I essentially controlled. Selwyn, what exactly are my options here? He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in that way that meant he was about to explain something complicated. Contractually, you have several avenues. First, the direct approach. Simply exercise your ownership rights and cancel the bookings. Clean, simple, devastating. And the indirect approaches? More subtle. Request facility inspections that could delay events. Invoke insurance review clauses that might suspend operations. Exercise your right to approve vendor lists, which could complicate catering arrangements. My mind raced through the possibilities. How long would it take to implement? Direct cancellation? I could have papers filed by tomorrow morning. The venues would be legally obligated to honor your authority. And she'd have no recourse? None. Your contracts predate hers by decades. In legal terms, it's not even a close call. I walked to his window, looking out at the City Herald and I had helped build. The downtown renovation project we'd catered. The business district where our events had launched careers and sealed deals. The social fabric we'd woven through 40 years of hospitality and service. I keep thinking about something Harold used to say, I said, still looking out the window. He'd tell me that the best business victories were the ones where your opponents never saw them coming. Smart man. He said that desperate people make noise, but powerful people make moves. When I turned around, Selwyn was smiling. So what kind of move do you want to make? The weight of the decision settled on my shoulders. I could destroy her wedding with a single phone call. But destroying something felt too easy, too crude. Harold had taught me to think bigger than revenge. I want to give her exactly what she asked for, I said finally. Which is? She said she only wanted important people at her wedding. I'm going to help her understand what that really means. Selwyn's eyebrows rose. How? By reminding every single one of these venues who the truly important person is. The one whose signature is on their foundational contracts. The one whose business relationships kept them afloat during recessions and rough patches. The one whose word still carries more weight than her money. A demonstration of power rather than an exercise of it? Exactly. Let her keep her bookings, but make sure everyone involved understands the hierarchy. Make sure she learns that exclusion is a game two can play. And if she doesn't learn the lesson? I picked up my purse, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Then we moved to the direct approach. But something tells me that once word gets around about who really controls these venues, the social dynamics are going to shift dramatically. Clarice, you realize what you're suggesting could completely destroy her wedding regardless of whether you cancel the bookings? I paused at his office door, thinking about my son who'd remained silent through all of this. About the years of sacrifice that had been dismissed with 6 cruel words. About the empire I'd built being used as a stage for my own humiliation. She wanted to exclude unimportant people, Selwyn. She's about to learn that she picked the wrong person to underestimate. The hallway outside his office felt different as I walked toward the elevator. I wasn't the hurt mother who'd climbed those attic stairs anymore. I was a founding partner with 4 decades of leverage, and I was finally ready to use it. They thought they had chosen their kingdom. They had unknowingly stepped into mine.
The first call I made Monday morning was to Patricia at Riverside Manor. Her voice was warm and professional, exactly the way it had been for 23 years of business together. "Clarice, how lovely to hear from you. What can I do for you today?" I wanted to discuss the Martinez wedding booking. There are some considerations I need to review. The pause was brief, but I heard it. The subtle shift from casual warmth to careful attention that meant she was reaching for files. "Of course. Let me pull that up. Is there a problem with the booking?" "Not a problem, exactly. More of a clarification about authority and approval processes." Another pause. Longer this time. "Clarice, are you referring to the original management agreements?" "I am." The silence stretched between us like a held breath. Patricia had been there when those contracts were signed. She knew exactly what those clauses meant. "I see. And you're invoking?" "My right to review and approve any major event that impacts our business relationship, as outlined in Section 12 of our original partnership agreement." "Of course. Absolutely. When would you like to schedule the review meeting?" "This week would be appropriate." By lunch, I'd made 6 similar calls. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial warmth, growing awareness, careful professional respect. None of the venue managers questioned my authority. They remembered who had stood by them during lean years, who had steered business their way, who had built the relationships that kept their doors open. Not one of them mentioned canceling anything. They didn't need to. We all understood that my approval was now required for the wedding to proceed. My phone buzzed with a text from my son's fiancée. "Heard you're causing problems with our venues. This needs to stop." I smiled and deleted the message without responding. The second wave of calls came Tuesday. Vendors this time. The florist who'd worked with me for 15 years. The photographer who'd gotten his start shooting our corporate events. The musicians who'd played my parties before they became a sought-after wedding band. Each conversation was polite, professional, and devastating in its implications. Just confirming vendor approval processes, I'd say. Making sure everything aligns with our established business standards. By Wednesday, the whispers had started. The wedding industry in our county was smaller than most people realized. Everyone knew everyone. And everyone was talking about Clarice Davenport suddenly taking an active interest in wedding approvals. The call came Thursday evening while I was watering my garden. "Mom, please. We need to talk." My son's voice was strained, tired. For a moment, my heart softened. This was my baby, after all. The child I'd rocked to sleep, whose fears I'd chased away, whose dreams I'd helped fund. Then I remembered that he'd let his fiancée call me unimportant without saying a word. "Hello, David. How are you?" "You know how I am. The wedding vendors are all acting strange. They keep mentioning meetings and approvals and reviews." "What's going on?" "I'm simply exercising my business responsibilities. Surely you understand that major events require proper oversight." "Mom, don't do this. Please." She's panicking. The garden sprinkler continued its steady rhythm, watering the roses Harold had planted years ago. Some things thrived with patience and steady attention. Some things withered when they were neglected. "What exactly am I doing, David?" "You know what you're doing. I'm protecting business interests I've spent 40 years building. If that causes inconvenience, Perhaps the solution is better planning and communication. She wants to apologize. Now that was interesting. Does she? Yes. She realizes she misspoke. About the guest list. About keeping things exclusive. Misspoke. The silence stretched between us. My son had always been terrible at lying. She wants to invite you to the wedding, Mom. Please. Can we fix this? I turned off the sprinkler and walked inside, my wet shoes leaving tracks on the kitchen floor. David, did you know that your business is 3 months behind on payments to Morrison Catering Supplies? Another silence. Longer. More desperate. How did you? I know because Morrison's contract flows through agreements I signed in 1994. Did you know that Highland Country Club requires co-signer approval for any event over $50,000? Mom. Did you know that your rehearsal dinner, your reception, your ceremony, and your photo locations all operate under management structures that include my oversight? The breathing on the other end of the line became shallow, rapid. What are you saying? I'm saying that perhaps it's time your fiancé learned what important people actually means in this business. Would you have given them a second chance, or would you have pressed forward? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on family loyalty versus self-respect. Friday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Mrs. Davenport? This is Miranda Martinez. I think we need to meet. Her voice was different now. Smaller. The arrogance had been replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Of course, dear. When would be convenient? Today? Please? I can come to you. By the time I set the phone down, 22 venues no longer belonged to her wedding in the way she'd imagined. But I hadn't even made my last call yet. Miranda Martinez sat in my living room like a chastened child, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide the panic in her eyes. She perched on the edge of Harold's old recliner, clutching her purse like a shield. Mrs. Davenport, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I poured tea from my good china set, taking my time. Let her sit with her discomfort. Let her feel what it was like to be dismissed and diminished. What kind of misunderstanding, dear? About the wedding guest list. I never meant to exclude you. Of course you're invited. You're David's mother. I handed her a cup, watching her hands shake slightly as she accepted it. How thoughtful. And what changed your mind? Her composure cracked just a little. I've been talking to the vendors. They all seem to respect you so much. Speak so highly of your business sense. They should. We built this industry together. Yes, I'm learning that. I had no idea how involved you were in the local wedding business. The admission hung in the air between us. She was beginning to understand that she'd picked a fight with someone far more powerful than she'd realized. Miranda, may I ask you something? She nodded eagerly, desperate to appear cooperative. When you said you only wanted important people at your wedding, what did you mean by that? The color drained from her face. I misspoke. I was stressed about the guest count, and I said something I didn't mean. But you did mean it, didn't you? You meant that I wasn't important enough to witness my son's wedding. Tears started forming in her eyes. Real ones, not the crocodile tears I'd expected. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. What are you sorry for exactly? For excluding you. For being disrespectful. For not recognizing. She struggled with the words. For not recognizing your position in the family and in the community. My position? You built all of this. The venues, the relationships, the business network that makes weddings like ours possible. And I tried to shut you out of it. The admission was more satisfying than I'd expected. But it was also too late. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed Highland Country Club. "Excuse me, dear. I need to take this." "Mrs. Davenport? This is James at Highland. I'm afraid we have a situation with the Martinez rehearsal dinner. The insurance company is requiring additional documentation before we can proceed." I walked to the kitchen, leaving Miranda alone with her thoughts. "What kind of documentation, James?" "Proof of business liability coverage that extends to all contracting parties. Given the scope of the event and the management agreements involved, they want confirmation from all signatory partners." Translation: they wanted my explicit written approval before proceeding. "I understand. I'll review the matter and get back to you." "Of course. Take your time." When I returned to the living room, Miranda was crying quietly into her teacup. "Is everything all right?" she asked hopefully. "Just business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." But we both knew that was a lie. Everything about her wedding had become my business. "Mrs. Davenport, what do I need to do to fix this?" The question I'd been waiting for. The moment when the balance of power became crystal clear to everyone involved. "I'm not sure it can be fixed, Miranda. Please. There must be something. The wedding is in 3 weeks. 200 guests have already made arrangements. David's family from across the country is flying in. Perhaps you should have considered that before deciding I wasn't important enough to include." I know I was wrong. But please, don't punish David for my mistake." That was the crux of it, wasn't it? David. My son who'd stood silently while his fiancée insulted me. Who'd let her exclude me without a word of protest. Who'd called only when their wedding was in jeopardy, not when his mother's feelings were hurt. "Miranda, do you know what I did when David was 12 and broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball?" She shook her head. "I made him work in her garden all summer to pay for it. Not because I couldn't afford the window, but because actions have consequences. And sometimes consequences are the only way we learn respect. But this is different. This is his wedding." "Yes, it is. And he chose to let you handle his mother however you saw fit. Now you're both learning what that choice costs." My phone rang again. This time it was Sunset Gardens. More business. Miranda asked when I hung up. "The photographer venue is having permit issues. They need additional approvals for commercial shoots." The web was tightening around her perfect day, strand by strand, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Mrs. Davenport, please. Name your terms. Whatever you want. A public apology. A bigger role in the wedding. Money. Whatever it takes." I set down my teacup and looked at this young woman who'd thought she could erase me with a few cruel words. "What I want, Miranda, is for you to understand that respect isn't optional. That family isn't disposable. That some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with apologies and desperation. So there's nothing I can do?" I smiled sadly. "You can plan a wedding without venues. I hear backyard ceremonies are very intimate." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of her crying. But I hadn't even made my last call yet.
My son arrived at my house the next morning looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, the desperate look of a man watching his carefully planned life crumble around him. "Mom, please. We need to talk." I let him in, noting how he avoided my eyes. Even now, even desperate, he couldn't look directly at the woman he'd allowed to be humiliated. "Would you like some coffee, David?" "No, I need you to listen. Really listen." We sat at the kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework for years. where we'd planned his college applications, discussed his first job, celebrated his business milestones. Where family conversations were supposed to happen with love and respect. I'm listening. Miranda made a mistake. A big one. She knows that now. But Mom, you're destroying our wedding. 200 people have made plans. My cousins are flying in from California. Miranda's parents have spent their retirement savings. And you're punishing all of them for what one person said in anger. The familiar weight of maternal guilt pressed against my chest. This was my son, after all. My baby. The center of my universe for 43 years. But then I remembered his silence. His cowardice. His willingness to sacrifice his mother's dignity for his bride's comfort. David, when Miranda called me unimportant, what did you do? He looked down at his hands. I wasn't there when she made that call. But you knew about it. You knew she'd excluded me. And what did you do? I thought you'd understand. That family would be flexible. Family should be flexible. But it should also be loyal. And protective. And willing to stand up for what's right. She was stressed about the wedding planning. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. Do they? Or do they say things they really think but usually hide? The question hung between us like smoke. He knew the answer. We both did. Mom, I can't choose between you and her. You already chose, David. You chose when you stayed silent. You chose when you let her treat me like hired help who could be dismissed at will. Tears started forming in his eyes. Real tears, like when he was a child and realized he'd disappointed me. What do you want me to do? I want you to think about who was there when your business was failing. Who co-signed your loans when banks wouldn't look at you. Who worked double shifts to pay for your education. Who built the foundation you're standing on. You did all of that. And then I want you to think about how easily you were willing to let someone erase me from the most important day of your life. It wouldn't have erased you. You'd still be my mother. But not publicly. Not visibly. Not in a way that mattered to the community that knows our history. He was crying openly now, and despite everything, my heart was breaking for him. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't do what, exactly? Don't exercise my legal rights? Don't protect business interests I've spent decades building? Don't expect basic respect from my own family? Don't destroy my wedding. The words hung in the air like an accusation. As if I was the villain in this story. As if protecting my dignity was somehow an attack on his happiness. David, I didn't destroy anything. I simply reminded people who I am and what I've built. If that threatens your wedding, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Because Miranda chose venues you control. Because she didn't know about your business connections. Because she made decisions in ignorance, not malice. Ignorance? David, did it ever occur to either of you to ask about my involvement in the industry where you were planning the biggest event of your lives? No. Did it occur to you to include me in any planning discussions? To ask my advice about vendors or venues or arrangements? No. Did it occur to you to wonder why your mother, who spent 40 years in the hospitality business, wasn't consulted about your wedding? No. The pattern was becoming clear. I hadn't been excluded accidentally. I'd been systematically ignored, dismissed as irrelevant to their grand plans. So Miranda's ignorance wasn't innocent, was it? It was chosen. Deliberate. She decided I had nothing valuable to contribute to your wedding planning. She was trying to handle everything herself. She wanted it to be perfect. Perfect for whom? Perfect without me. He had no answer for that. My phone rang. Another venue. Another complication. Another reminder that their perfect day was built on my life's work. I have to take this, David. Mom, please. But he forgot something important while he was begging. He forgot that I wasn't the one who started this fight. The grand ballroom was the crown jewel of their reception plans. $15,000 for the venue alone, plus another $20,000 for decorations, catering upgrades, and premium service packages. The place where Miranda had planned to make her grand entrance, where 200 guests would toast their future, where she'd imagined herself as the center of a fairy tale wedding. When Patricia called Tuesday morning, her voice was carefully professional. Clarice, I'm afraid we have a situation with the Martinez reception booking. What kind of situation? The fire marshal is requiring additional safety inspections due to the scale of the event. Given the liability implications and the management agreements involved, we need documented approval from all contracting partners before we can proceed. I see. When do you need this documentation? For an event this size with this many guests, we'd need it by end of business today to maintain the booking. Today? Yes. The insurance requirements are quite specific about timing. I understand. I'll need to review the matter thoroughly. Of course. Take all the time you need. But we both knew what that meant. There was no way to complete a thorough review of contracts, insurance policies, and liability coverage in a few hours. The grand ballroom would have to cancel. 22 venues, and I'd saved the best for last. My phone started ringing within the hour. First Miranda, sobbing hysterically. Then David, desperate and angry. Then Miranda's mother, then David's best man, then a parade of wedding party members who'd somehow gotten my number. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages were a symphony of panic. Threats, bribes, desperate pleas, angry demands. The whole beautiful facade of their perfect wedding was crumbling, and everyone was scrambling to find someone to blame. But I was gardening, tending Harold's roses, enjoying the spring sunshine and the satisfaction of watching things grow with patience and proper care. The doorbell rang around noon. I ignored it. It rang again. Then again. Finally, I walked to the front window and looked out. David's car was in my driveway. Miranda was on my porch, still in her pajamas, mascara streaked down her face, looking like the world had ended. Which, from her perspective, it probably had. I opened the door. The ballroom cancelled, she whispered. I heard. That was our reception venue. The main venue. Where everyone was supposed to celebrate. Yes, I know. Without it, we don't have a wedding. Not really. Just a quick ceremony and nowhere for people to go afterward. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Broken. All the arrogance and entitlement stripped away, leaving just a scared young woman who'd finally learned the cost of cruelty. I'm sorry this is difficult for you. Are you? Are you really sorry? The question caught me off guard. Was I sorry? Was there any part of me that regretted watching this young woman's dreams shatter into pieces? I'm sorry it came to this, Miranda. I'm sorry you felt the need to exclude me. I'm sorry my son didn't defend me. I'm sorry respect had to be taught through consequences instead of given freely. But you're not sorry about canceling everything. I didn't cancel anything. I simply reminded people of existing business relationships and contractual obligations. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. Canceling would have been petty revenge. What I did was protect interests I've spent 40 years building. She slumped against my doorframe like a marionette with cut strings. Everyone's going to blame me. 200 guests, wasted travel plans, lost deposits. Everyone's going to know I'm the one who caused this. Yes, they probably will. My parents are humiliated. David's family thinks I'm a monster. The wedding party is furious. Actions have consequences, Miranda. I tried to teach this lesson to my son when he was 12. But he learned from it. He became a better person because you held him accountable. Yes, he did. So what am I supposed to learn from this? That you can destroy someone's life if they hurt your feelings. I looked at this broken young woman and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Something closer to sadness. You're supposed to learn that some people build their importance with decades of work, sacrifice, and relationship building. And that trying to erase them is like trying to tear down a building by removing the foundation. I never tried to erase you. You tried to make me invisible at the most important moment of my son's life. You tried to exclude me from witnessing the day I'd worked 43 years to see. The silence stretched between us. In the distance, I could hear children playing in the neighborhood park, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Mrs. Davenport, is there any way to fix this? Any way at all? I thought about Harold, about what he'd say if he were here. About mercy and justice and the difference between punishment and teaching. The venues are gone, Miranda. The contracts are cancelled. Your fairy tale wedding is over. So that's it? You win. Nobody wins, dear. That's what you're supposed to learn from this. She walked back to David's car like a woman heading to her own execution. I watched them drive away, knowing that somewhere in the city, 200 people were changing their travel plans and learning that sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply letting people experience the full weight of their choices. And on the day she thought she'd shine, all she had left were ashes. What do you think? Was I too harsh, or just right? Let me know in the comments below.
3 weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that David and Miranda had gotten married after all. A small ceremony in her parents' backyard, maybe 30 people total, hamburgers from a local restaurant, and a cake from the grocery store. No fairy tale entrance. No grand ballroom. No 200 guests witnessing their perfect day. Just family, close friends, and the humbling reality of what happens when you mistake arrogance for power. The call came 2 days after their backyard wedding. David's voice was different. Older somehow, worn down by weeks of crisis management and hard truths. Mom? Could I come over? Alone. I made coffee and waited. When he arrived, he looked like a man who'd aged years in a matter of weeks. The cocky confidence he'd carried since his business started succeeding was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wisdom. How was the wedding? I asked. Small. Quiet. Actually kind of nice, once we got over the shock of it all. I'm glad you found a way to make it work. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us like dust after an explosion. Mom, I owe you an apology. Do you? I let her treat you badly. I stayed quiet when I should have defended you. I chose the easy path instead of the right one. The words I'd been waiting to hear for weeks. But now that he'd said them, they felt smaller than I'd expected. Less satisfying. Why didn't you defend me, David? Because it was easier to let her handle the guest list than to have a fight about it. Because I thought you'd understand and forgive, like you always do. Because I took your love for granted. And now I know that taking someone for granted is just another way of disrespecting them. I poured fresh coffee, buying time to process emotions I wasn't sure how to handle. What did you learn from all this, David? That my business success, my social connections, my whole life is built on foundations you helped lay. That the woman I was marrying had no idea who my mother really was, and I never bothered to tell her. And And that quiet women who write things down really do change the world. The phrase caught me off guard. Harold used to say that. Had I said it to David? I couldn't remember. Your father used to say that. You said it too. When I was a kid and complained about having to write thank you notes for Christmas presents. You told me that people who document things, who keep records, who write things down, they're the ones who really have power. I'd forgotten that. I hadn't. And when all the venues started cancelling, when the contracts got complicated, when everyone started talking about management agreements and partnership clauses, I remembered. We sat quietly, letting 43 years of motherhood settle into this new understanding between us. How is Miranda handling everything? She's learning. The hard way, like I did. She started asking questions about our family history, about the business, about you. She wants to understand how she got it so wrong. And what are you telling her? That my mother built an empire so quietly, so carefully, that even her own son forgot how powerful she was. The compliment warmed me more than I'd expected. David, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this out of spite or revenge. I did it because respect isn't optional in families. Because love without respect is just sentimentality. Because someone had to teach both of you that actions have consequences. I understand that now. Do you? Really? Really? And Mom, thank you. For what? For not letting us get away with it. For holding the line when we tried to cross it. For teaching us lessons we needed to learn, even when it was painful. 3 months later, Miranda called to invite me to lunch. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral ground where she could apologize properly without the weight of crisis hanging over us. Mrs. Davenport, I know I can't undo what I said or how I treated you. But I want you to know that I've learned from it. What have you learned? That kindness matters more than exclusivity. That respect is earned through years of service, not bought with money. That the most important people are often the quietest ones. And that I married into a family with a remarkable woman at its center, and I was too foolish to see it. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'd like to start over, if you'll let me. I'd like to learn from you instead of fighting against you. Looking at this young woman, humbled and sincere, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for revenge or justice or vindication, but for the possibility of real family. I'd like that, Miranda. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Miranda started working part-time in what remained of our family business. She had good instincts, once she learned to listen. She was organized, diplomatic, and surprisingly good at building relationships with vendors. Most importantly, she was learning what I'd spent 40 years perfecting, that real power isn't about exclusion or control. It's about inclusion, service, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that lasts. David's business recovered, with help from connections I'd maintained and relationships I'd nurtured. Miranda's parents, initially mortified by the wedding disaster, came to understand that sometimes the best lessons are the hardest ones. And I learned something too. That justice and mercy aren't opposites. They're partners in the dance of holding people accountable while still loving them enough to teach them better. Some women shout their way to power. Others buy it. Others inherit it. But the smartest women, we build it so quietly, so completely, that by the time people realize what we've created, we're already holding all the cards. She wanted a wedding without me. She got a wedding without the foundation I'd built. And in losing her fairy tale, she found something more valuable: respect, humility, and the beginning of real family. That's worth more than any ballroom could ever be. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next powerful tale of quiet justice and family lessons. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own moment of truth. Sometimes the most important battles are won not with loud words, but with quiet dignity and unshakable strength.